Have you ever had this super random itch on your body for no obvious reason? And scratching it just feels so good. But have you ever stopped to wonder, why does this even happen? And did you know it's actually not as random as it seems? This is Samuel, and a lot of the time he asks his partner Kayla to scratch the middle of his back. And yeah, he really enjoys it. That, of course, got Kayla curious, like it always does. And she asked, why do our bodies suddenly itch for no clear reason? Samuel said, maybe it's just dry skin. But Kayla was like, yeah, but you don't even have dry skin. Then Samuel said, okay, maybe I ate something I'm allergic to? Kayla thought about it for a second. Yeah, that could make sense, but is that always the reason? So first, Kayla and Samuel went to the library and found a few books on the topic. But the information felt outdated, and the explanations were way too complicated. You know, super scientific, hard to follow.
Did you understand Chapter 3?
Not a word.
So instead, they went to one of their friends who's a researcher and loves digging through academic papers. David got to work, reading through study after study, trying to explain everything in a simple way for Kayla and Samuel. So, let's listen to what he found. All right, so first, let's talk about what an itch actually is. An itch is a specific kind of nerve signal that starts in the skin and tells your brain, hey, there's a small irritation right here. This signal travels through very thin nerve fibers, ones that don't carry pain or touch. These nerves send the itch signal to the spinal cord first, and from there, it goes up to the brain. Your brain translates that message into an annoying sensation with basically one response. I need to scratch this. But why does it happen so suddenly? Why does this message just pop up out of nowhere telling us to scratch? David dug deep into the research and found a few main reasons. The first one is short-term local irritation. A mosquito, a single strand of hair, a piece of fabric, or contact with something irritating, like soap or a certain plant, can activate the nerves in that exact spot. Sometimes we can't even see what triggered it in that moment. Maybe it's just a super thin fiber from your clothes. But even if you don't notice it, it still does its job. Kayla said, okay, before you tell me the second reason, I seriously can't wait to ask this. What actually happens when we scratch an itch that makes it go away, and sometimes even feel good? David explained to Kayla that an itch is a specific nerve signal that starts in the skin and travels to the spinal cord in the brain. When you scratch yourself, you apply stronger mechanical pressure to the skin, which activates a different group of nerve fibers, the ones that usually carry pain. In the nervous system, pain and itch signals kind of compete with each other. So when the pain signal comes in, it can suppress the itch signal along the spinal cord, making the brain feel the itch less. Research shows that different parts of the brain are involved in this process, including reward systems and pathways in both the spinal cord and the brain. That's why scratching can trigger the release of dopamine and create a short-term feeling of pleasure, while also activating pathways that quiet the itch signal. And that's exactly why scratching feels so satisfying. Now, let's get back to our main question. Why do we feel itchy in the first place? And let's move on to the second reason, because from here on out, things get a bit more serious. Reason number 2, dry skin. Looks like Samuel was actually right this time. One of the most common causes of itchy skin is simply dryness, especially when the weather is cold and dry, or when your body is dehydrated. Sometimes the dryness can even get bad enough to mess with the skin barrier and lead to issues like fungal growth. Okay, moving on to the third reason, local inflammatory reactions. Yeah, the name sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. In this type of itch, the skin's local immune system kicks in and releases substances that send itch signals. And the most famous one? We all know it. Histamine. Here's what happens. Your skin comes into contact with something harmless or something you're sensitive to, like an insect bite, a certain food, a specific plant, or even a medication. The trigger isn't necessarily dangerous, but to your immune system, it looks suspicious. So immune cells get activated and release histamine. Histamine causes blood vessels to widen and creates tiny gaps between the cells lining the capillaries. almost like unzipping them just a little. Fluid leaks into the surrounding tissue, which leads to swelling on the skin, like what happens with hives. That swelling, along with histamine and other chemicals, activates the itch signal. This kind of itch is usually fast, intense, and antihistamines tend to work really well on it. And finally, the last reason, and this one is really worth knowing about, neuropathic itch. To keep things simple, let's not get too technical. Neuropathic itch happens when the skin itself isn't actually irritated, but a nerve is mistakenly sending an itch signal. This can happen when a nerve has been cut, compressed, burned, damaged, or affected by long-term inflammation. The nerve is basically trying to send a "something's wrong" message, and the brain ends up interpreting it as an itch. That's why this type of itch is often seen after surgery, after shingles, or in people with diabetes. And because it travels through pathways that don't involve histamine, antihistamines usually don't help at all. Right at that moment, Samuel remembered something and said, "Oh, is that why wounds or stitches start itching too? And then, why does everyone say that if it itches, it means it's healing?" David said. Yes, itching around a wound or stitches is partly related to healing. But the real explanation comes from 3 different processes happening in the body. First, when the skin is injured, the immune system activates and repair cells get to work. During this process, chemicals are released that stimulate itch receptors in the skin. Second, healing nerves send out noisy signals. This is neuropathic itch again. The nerve fibers in that area were damaged, and now they're reconnecting. Their signals are unstable, which is why you feel itching, tingling, or pins and needles. Third, the skin is rebuilding itself. New skin has less natural oil and feels tight, which irritates the skin's nerves once more. The combination of these 3 processes makes wounds and stitches itch, but it doesn't automatically mean everything is healing perfectly. If the itching comes with intense redness, swelling, or discharge, it's best to check with a doctor. Kayla and Samuel thanked David for all the information. Then Kayla turned to Samuel and said, "Wow, it's crazy how much story there can be behind something as simple as an itch. Most of the time, my arm itches, I scratch it, and that's it. I never thought it could go this deep." Samuel laughed and said, "And this is exactly why I tell you not to question everything." But honestly, it was worth it. We learned a lot. Then he added, "Just promise me one thing. Next time you get a simple itch somewhere on your body, don't run through all of this in your head and turn it into something scary. Because most of the time, it's really just an itch."